On the build show today, we're going to be talking about this house under construction that looks like a Monopoly house. Now, y'all grew up playing Monopoly, right? These houses on the board, it's not really meant to be a house. It's just the shape, the iconic shape of a house. And yet this house behind me looks incredibly a lot like a Monopoly house. We got a big green house. That happens to be the color of the Huber zip system sheathing. But we also have no overhangs on this house. Now, you've heard me say on multiple episodes that overhangs are good for a house, so why am I building a house with no overhangs? Today's build show, talking about Monopoly framing. Got a lot of good stuff for you today. Let's get going. All right, so the house behind me, guys, this is actually my family's personal house. And you would think that a house that I'm building would have overhangs, but yet you look at this, and as I said, it looks a whole lot like a Monopoly piece, doesn't it? You know, that Monopoly piece, no overhangs, although funny enough, these new pieces have just a slight overhang, nothing on the gable ends, but a little bit on the front and the back of the house. The point is, though, this house behind me, no overhangs. Like, look at that gable up there on the second floor. You can see the wall runs right into the roof. Now, why am I doing that? Let's think about this for a minute. Most houses that are framed, traditionally, they're gonna frame platform framing, which means you're gonna frame the first floor walls, the floor is gonna sit on top of the walls, then you're gonna frame the second floor walls. Then on top of the second floor walls, you're either gonna have traditional roof rafters, let's say 2x8s or 2x10s, or you might have some trusses. Now, the house that was here before had trusses, and those trusses had a 2-foot overhang on the house on most locations. Now, overhangs are good for houses. Why am I not doing it here? Well, I've basically taken Joe Stiebrecht's perfect wall concept and I've applied it here. I think the term Monopoly framing or Monopoly house might make a little more sense. And here's basically what we're doing. We're using the zip system sheathing. That's that green sheathing you're seeing behind me. And we've framed it so that the roof rafters, as we put those on, are clipped at the wall. So in other words, I've got 2x8 roof rafters. So my first floor wall ends, and then it's about 8 inches taller up there on the roof behind me, so that then I could run that zip sheathing all the way up to the roof deck, and then the roof deck then goes continuously all the way up to the ridge. And the reason why I'm doing that is I want a really good raincoat on the outside of the house, but especially, even more importantly, what I'm looking for at this layer is a really good air tightness layer. Now let's think about it for a minute. If this is a real modern house with no overhangs, it'd be akin to putting my raincoat on, putting my hood up, and hoping for the next 100 years that I wouldn't get wet on the house. And when the rains come, I'm making sure that my raincoat keeps me dry. Woo! Yep, I got wet. Well, my body did fine. My face got a little wet, right? No overhangs to protect me on the top. My pants got a little wet, but for the most part, oh, I got a little wet down here. Hopefully my mic's still working right now. For the most part, my body's dry. So this house is gonna do a good job, for the most part, of the main body, but we really want those overhangs. So, you know, if that rain came, and instead of just having a jacket, I had a jacket plus an umbrella like a old school house would have. What's gonna happen when I have a good umbrella going? Nothing. I might get a little bit of the bottom of my pants wet, but that's really it. My body's gonna be just fine. And you know what? My raincoat's not even zipped up. Look, my dry duck jacket here, it didn't have to do any heavy lifting. The raincoat did everything for us. And that's really why old houses did really well, because they had a big umbrella over them. The raincoats were pretty terrible 50 years ago, but they had that big umbrella, and that big umbrella is what saved those old houses. So what I'm gonna do on this house is the best of both worlds. Joe Stiebrecht calls it perfect wall. I'm gonna call it the Monopoly framed house, or the Monopoly house. And here's what we did. From the foundation all the way to the peak of the roof, you can see I've done a really good job of taping and using some fluid applied to make sure that that house is nice and watertight, but even more importantly, airtight. And then, after I got the house all zipped up, let's actually physically zip my raincoat here. I'll even put my hood on just for visuals. Now I'm gonna put my insulation layer on top of that. If I can get my coat on, okay. So now my insulation is gonna go on top. Now if I were just to go ahead and have the hose come out now, I would get wet again, wouldn't I? So instead of that, let's think about if I were to take this and now put an umbrella on the house. Now this is a good setup, right? I've got my rain jacket on, which is also keeping me airtight. I've got my my insulation layer, this big goose down jacket on over top of my raincoat. And now my umbrella is going to keep the most of the water off the bulk of the house. And that's basically what I'm doing here on this Monopoly framed house. Now let's talk about the specifics a little bit on how we accomplish this. What's the mechanics of this system? As you see here, I'm using the Huber zip system on the outside. The key is having a continuous water and air barrier from the foundation all the way to the peak of the roof with no breaks. If I were to frame this traditionally, like I have for many, many years, with rafters that poke through, I'd have to go to extreme measures to try and seal that up, and it's not easy. Plus, I'd have a bunch of places that have breaks in my insulation. Now, we're going to get into this in a future episode, so don't feel like you need to know all the details today, but on the outside of my house, I'm going to put a really good and really thick insulation level. I'm going to be using Atlas's polyiso insulation with a foil facing on my walls, 2 inches thick, and on my roof I'm going to do two 2-inch layers, so I actually have 4 inches of this on my roof deck, which means that I'm going to have a really good raincoat with the zip, which is also going to be airtight. Then I'm going to have a really good insulation layer, and then in a future video I'm going to show you how we're going to frame these overhangs. We're actually going to put the umbrella on the house after the insulation goes on. That's really key to the success of this house. Now, if we go into the inside of the house, let me talk a little bit about the framing here. I did another episode on this, but I want to mention a few things that I think are applicable to what we're talking about here. You know, we frame this with 2x4 construction, mainly because this was originally a 2x4 framed house. My foundation was set up for it. All my plans were, if you watch my other videos, it was actually intended to be a remodel and ended up being the real rebuild, but it was originally a remodel project. Now, we could have kept the remodel. We could have just sawn off the overhangs, and in fact that's what I was going to start to do on this house. We have done a ton of demos, so all the facade has come down. This is all brick on the front, and you can start to get a feel for what I'm doing for energy efficiency. See how we cut off all the overhangs here? That's what's referred to as a chainsaw retrofit, where basically we came in and sawed off with a sawzall all this overhang here. And then on the gable side of the house over here, see if I can zoom out, we did the same thing. The idea is when we come and put this house back together, well, number one, we're not going to leave this crappy thermoply sheathing on anymore. That's going to get pulled off. We're going to put a full zip system on the outside for airtightness and waterproofing. I've got new windows that come in. But then I'm going to do some exterior insulation, and the exterior insulation is going to run continuous on the foundation all the way up, and we want it to turn and go up the roof. So actually we're going to finish cutting these back so that they'll actually be flush here with this shear wall straight up, as if you were on the roof and you took a chainsaw to the house itself. Joe Stiebert calls that a chainsaw retrofit, and that's a great plan for a remodel. But I had such terrible framing from the 70s on this house and so much rot, it didn't work out. So what we did instead was we reframed. Now I reframed this a little beefier than a traditional house. We used all LVL studs. These are Boise Cascades LVL studs on the inside. That's laminated veneer lumber. It's basically like a plywood stud, quite a bit stronger than a standard stud. I really like that, especially when you're framing with 2x4s, because we don't have that thickness. And I also wanted to make sure that I was going to be ready for the extreme Texas weather this house is going to go through over the coming decades. Now you'll notice we also used LVL headers. I used Boise Cascade engineered floor joists, and then interestingly enough, I also framed the roof system with LVLs. Now when we framed the roof, again, we didn't frame this with a traditional framing method where we'd have a bird's mouth in that, let's say 2x8 rafter, and we'd set that on top of the wall Instead, we clipped the rafters where they hit the outside of the wall, and then when we sheathed it, we sheathed all the way up. And you can see that here. There's an 8-foot break in the plywood. These are 9-foot studs. And then that last little piece of zip system right here is just a little bit taller. That's going to make up for that 8 inches, or maybe these are 10 inches. I can't remember exactly. But we've got that full depth so that that sheathing here is going up and actually touching the roof sheathing right up there. So it's totally continuous, which allowed me to use a 6-inch band of tape in between those two. That means I'm going to have a really, really airtight house, and that's key to overall efficiency. Now, in the roof system, though, we did one other thing that I thought was really cool. We've got a conditioned attic going on this house, which means that all the attics on this house are going to be within the thermal envelope. We've air sealed all the way up there. We're not going to have vents at the eaves and vents at the ridge. That's all going to be totally closed off. And because we're using the zip system sheathing and we're taping all that completely, we don't need to use spray foam or some other methods for airtightness. We can just rely on that zip for airtightness. Once we get our JELD-WEN window and doors in, we'll do a blower door test to confirm how tight we are and see if there's any small areas that we've missed that need some additional air leakage control. But I think we're going to find this house is very, very tight, certainly under 1 ACH 50 on the blower door. Let's go back to the rafters though. On the second floor, you're going to notice that those rafters in the upstairs have a ton of clear span, a ton of open space on that attic on the upstairs, which gives me lots of good space for mechanicals. The other thing it gives me down here in Texas is lots of space for storage. You know, in Texas, we've got no basements. That's typically because we've got lots of rock. In fact, my whole neighborhood here, 6 inches of dirt and then solid rock below there, which means I had a great foundation from the 70s. It didn't move at all on me, but there's no basement storage, right? And our garages are overflowing in Texas. There's only so much space if you've got a car or two to go in there, as well as the bikes and the tools and all those other things. So having a big open clear attic was huge for me. Again, the benefit of those LVLs was now I've got super strong rafters, I've got some collar ties up at the ridge, and then my ceiling joists are actually part of the plenum. That's part of the bottom cord of the truss, so to speak, that I'm making. Stay tuned for a future video. I'm going to show you how we screwed everything together. We're going to talk about the engineering on that. But as we're talking about it today, what it allowed me to do was to build this house that looks like a Monopoly framed house. Guys, if you've got questions on this, comment below. This is a little bit of a mind-blowing video. Really a traditional house, but yet built in a way that's very uncommon. Stay tuned for window install details. Stay tuned for foam details. Stay tuned for all the insulation on this house, all the overframing where we're going to be actually framing these rafters on the outside to look like a traditional house. So this house will have overhangs when it's done. We got a lot to go here. My friend Steve Basic helped me with a bunch of these details. And by the way, he's also shooting videos for us on the Build Show Network. If you've not been there, go to buildshownetwork.com and check out Steve's videos. Really, really smart architect who really gets the building science. And I have learned a ton from him. Guys, if you're not currently a subscriber, hit that subscribe button below. We've got new content every Tuesday and every Friday. Follow me on Twitter and Instagram. Otherwise, we'll see you next time on The Build Show.